The Netherlands has one of the world's densest motorway networks, but not only that, they're also highly regarded for their expansive train network, considered one of the most efficient and user-friendly in Europe. This week, I'm going to focus on these two aspects of infrastructure in Nieuworden, our fictional Dutch city in City Skylines 2. We're ditching the detailing, and we're going big on some engineering projects. I'll talk you through the inspiration for today's build with some real-life examples, and I'll show you how to bring it all together. But just one thing, it might not all go quite to plan. Last week, the focus was all about injecting some detailed, walkable street-level areas into the city, experimenting with some different networks and decorating tools, and trying to create some believable pedestrian streets and open areas. We now have the start of what will be a major commercial area in the town, and it's going to give us a natural entry point into what will be the city's old town. The large city square has given us a focal point for the city and a much needed break in the built environment, and I think it works well with the city's museum district from episode 2. The commercial elements can be a bit of a challenge with the assets available, so taking a bit of time to do that experimentation and really get familiar with the assets should make things a little bit easier and a bit quicker to pull together next time. Picking up from last week's build, there are a couple of things I want to talk about before jumping into the main infrastructure builds, and in the comments I had a few questions asking what mod it was I was using on the roof of some of the buildings. Now I purposely didn't mention it on a video as it was a locally installed mod and it was really just a temporary measure. If you're not familiar with the concept, these are mods that are not on the PDX mod platform, but instead they're shared on Discord and whatnot, and they're copied into the game files manually. I've had a few issues with mods and I won't bore you with the details, but the upshot is that I think I finally get everything in the playset that I need and that I want, and crucially, to make things straightforward, they are all on PDX mods, which is ideal. So this is going to make things a little bit easier for me to share the game saves with our Patreon members, and a big shout out to the members, old and new, Patreon and YouTube. The support here is massively appreciated. YouTube doesn't give you a huge reward for making gaming videos, so the support you're able to give generously is going a long way, so thank you for that. So the mod I was using in last week's video was Static Noise's excellent Real Vision pack, which did the job and it gives me some alternative colours for the roofs, and that was really handy because there were a few mods that weren't loading. But the downside was that it actually covered up some of the windows as well, so not ideal. That's fine as a temporary measure, but I did need a better solution, and that's now arrived in the form of the brick and stone wall decals pack by Erin. If you're making any type of European build of any description, you're really going to want to pick this up. There's multiple brick effects, and what you'll notice is that in most scenarios it will allow you to apply the effect on the surface without covering the windows. There's a few exceptions, but on the whole it works pretty great. So what this has allowed me to do is to open up a wider selection of assets to use in this Dutch themed build. I don't need to worry about colour palettes of buildings from different region packs. I can use whatever I want, and it doesn't matter if they can be recoloured, we can just simply stick some decals on them. And that's absolutely huge for this build. I'm a very happy man to be able to have that tool to use. So shout out Erin for creating this. It's arrived at the perfect time. So with all that out of the way, let's talk about traffic. How are your cities doing? I reckon if you've been playing a while, the truck traffic has probably died down a bit by now, but the pedestrian traffic is still, what can we call it, robust? I guess. Now I'm not going to lie, I've actually really enjoyed just sitting back and watching it, but for a city of 25k it might be a bit much. It's been publicly acknowledged in the forum as an issue, so hopefully we get some movement on that, because I know that some of you guys with some really big cities, that's going to be a major issue. Let's get on with the build now. I think I mentioned last week I had planned reworking the train yard. Currently we have it well out of the city on the edge of the map, but that doesn't really fit with my default actions of building from within the inside and working my way out for this particular build. I needed some inspiration for ideas on how to make it work, and I thought potentially we would probably have to have it off, the main island, but I found some great inspiration in the south of the Netherlands in Maastricht. The train yard is pretty much right beside the actual main train station itself, really compact, and at least I know that I can fit it in the island and it's going to look reasonable, it's going to look realistic. We're basing it on a real life example, so there's no reason why that shouldn't be the case. But in addition to this, I wanted to try and get some of the train tracks looking a little bit better. The vanilla stuff can look a little bit wonky, and I've seen people like Dava doing some brilliant work on Twitch with the train yards and whatnot, and I thought I'll have a piece of that, I'll give it a go and see how we get on. Luckily for me, there's a pretty good guide on Reddit. I'll give you the link to that below, but it's pretty much a step-by-step on how to get some of the train switches looking much better. It looks like it's a reasonable bit of work, but I had some time and I thought that is definitely going to be worth it if I can pull it off. So job number one was to get rid of all of the net lanes that we had in from the previous build. Should be easy enough to put these back in place, it's just a case of drawing them out. And these net lanes are from one of Rizra's old city net lanes pack. They are absolutely phenomenal, really easy detailing, and they will be used again when we build this back up. I use move it at various parts to try and drag out the nodes, so when the trains switch there, just as they're coming in the tunnel, we could get a little bit of a better switch over, and it looks okay, but you'll see as we get along it might not necessarily end up that way. Going to quickly use the tool brush and we'll get rid of all of the little bushes that we have sunken into the ground. And using the Better Bulldozer tool, we're going to get rid of the sub-elements on this train station. And again, this is all part of the guide, the tracks we're essentially going to replace. So I'll finally get the opportunity to use some of Tygon's rail infrastructure pack. I'm in fact going to use two of the depots here. I'm going to use the large one and the smaller rectangular one. I think if I remember correctly, these both give 6 trains, so we should have 12 in total, giving us plenty of opportunity to expand later on. So it was time to try and get some of the tracks in place, and I'm just going to use these snapping tools and just draw these in at 90-degree angles. I use the one-way ones here just to kind of try and help give myself a visual indication and reminder of what exactly I'm doing, but this part of it obviously was pretty straightforward. In terms of the actual switches themselves, what I decided to do was to just really concentrate on making sure that every track could be connected to every track, that's parallel, that's going in the same direction. This pattern isn't based on any real life example that, quite frankly, is above my pay grade. I ended up kind of going into the rabbit hole of train switches, and I just ended up staring at model train collections for hours. So that really wasn't all that helpful, and I thought I'll probably go for a more practical solution instead. We ended up with this. To make things a little bit more difficult, I really wanted to try and hook up the train yards with the same sort of method, and wasn't entirely sure if it was going to work or not, but I thought, in for a penny, in for a pound. Hooking up the double tracks didn't seem too bad, but I could see pretty much immediately that we're going to be introducing jank straight away, so that might be a challenge given that we've just started this process. So as I hook up the last of the connections to the double train track, things were actually looking not too bad. Now obviously that train yard's looking a bit of a mess, but once I actually got rid of the additional tracks that weren't necessary past the main sort of collector, didn't look too bad. I thought really on that side of things, all I would really need to do is just straighten up the nodes, and I think that was going to be not too bad looking actually. Worked out okay. Round on the other side of the train station, things were a little bit more straightforward. I'm not messing about with double tracks, I'm just going to have a single double track, if that makes sense. And here all I decided to do is just to make sure that we have everything hooked up nicely, and we'll get rid of the additional tracks that we don't need. Hooking these up was easy. We're just going to basically just drive them straight into that double track. So it's time to get the tracks into position, so we're going to use mover, and we're going to just basically select the nodes and the segments, and we'll just push them into place. Now, the first issue I had was really just getting the right heights on these. I guess because the networks are squished that close together, it's going to be a little bit difficult, and we ended up with this thing. Now, I think some of you know where this is going already, to be honest. The writing's on the wall. If you break the game this much, you know what's coming up next. Yep, this wasn't the first time either, so if you do mess about with Move It this much, especially with the networks, road networks or rail networks, then you're going to expect a crash or two along the way. So once we had everything up and running and loaded back up, it was time to get back on and see if we can try this again. That guide looked really nice, with its end result, and I think we're absolutely miles away from it for now. So really what I wanted to do was to just start away with the furthest away track and then sort of work our way down, and hopefully as we go along we can just shift the nodes into place as we do it. That was the plan anyway. Obviously you're going to see how things worked out in reality. I think in fairness I probably made it a little bit more difficult than it had to be. Obviously we don't have the space above the station there. We've got the existing development in place, and we're trying to hook up existing lines and a rail yard at the same time, and perhaps in hindsight it was maybe just a little bit too much. But however, let's skip on, let's have a look at the end result, and we can have a quick chat about it. I think it was at this point where I kind of realised that things probably weren't going to get much better than how they look right now. We have quite a difference in some of the heights in the network where the nodes have been, squished together. We obviously have a fair bit of jankiness that I don't think I was realistically going to be able to straighten out. And I did try, I promise you I did try. But yeah, move it, manipulation mode, changing elevations and all that kind of stuff, it just wasn't going to happen, unfortunately. So it was time to admit that it is a skill issue, and time to admit I need to go back a few saves and I need to start again. And frankly, I was spending far too long on this and having nothing to show for it. So after leaving what can only be described as an absolute shambles behind us, I decided just to simplify things, and I'm going to try and work within my skill bracket. So what I decided to do with the yard was to just have one big collector going directly into the existing track. I'm going to try and take these additional tracks out just as straight as possible and lead it directly into the collector. That's the plan anyway. And some of them will go straight in, some of them will need a little bit of coaxing, and the ones that are beside that double track at the top of the screen, we're going to have to curve them in a little bit. Obviously we've got the existing track in place already. Taking that uppermost track in, it actually worked out pretty well. It can be kind of inconsistent, I guess, working with the rail, as you've probably already saw, but sometimes you get a pretty nice result on the switches, and sometimes maybe not so much. But again, a little kind of manipulation mode on move it, and we can try and drag these things out a little bit and just experiment with what looks good and maybe what needs a little bit of work. So we're going to end up with a few different switches along the yard, which is pretty nice. We've got that main one there at the top. We're going to try and squeeze in one here in the middle, and then obviously we've got one down on the right hand side. So again, I ended up with a bit of an inconsistent result. Some of the switches look fantastic, and one of them, I think the middle one, I just couldn't get it in without having that sort of double back, like kind of U-turn almost on the track. But I think overall, things are looking a hell of a lot better than they did a few minutes ago. Well, one thing, not really related to this build, but I did notice that we do have a new net lane. We've got a new fence. That looks pretty nice. Gonna have a little play about with that, see if I can try and maybe recolor it at some point as well. But yeah, one thing to note, guys, there is a new net lane fence there if you're interested in detailing. After throwing down some of the net lanes there to decorate the yard and at least get the base of the ground in for it, I thought actually it's probably worth just checking before I go any further if things are actually working, and I'm glad to report at least one of the yards was working without issue. So that was a pretty good start, pretty happy with that. It means I don't have to redo anything, but I do wonder why the second yard wasn't working. I figured it out, it wasn't connected to the road, so I had a little bit of a rejig with the road, just make sure it had access, and then we can see the trains flying out of there. And again, it's one of these disadvantages of playing with notifications off. Unfortunately, you do miss some of these things, but if you just click on the building, and they will give you all the information that you need. So we've carved out something of the city that we can use for various different services, and I'm going to sort of lean into that a little bit, and we're going to get a little bus depot in here as well. We've got the space, I think we've got the sort of lower land value, and it kind of makes sense to make the most of it there while we can. These sort of big service terminals and facilities are not going to look good randomly in the middle of the city, so having them out here all together will probably make sense. And I think we can add potentially, a little bit of industrial down here as well. If we have a look at our main inspiration, which was Maastricht Station and Maastricht Yard, then there's plenty of storage, plenty of warehousing, bit of industrial down there as well, and I think I'd very much like to mirror that. So we can see how the assets work together here. We've used the ploppable arts venue, multiple of them to create a bigger facility, and I think it blends in pretty nicely. We've got plenty of space here to expand, and I am going to do that in the build today, but it's also going to give us a little bit of scope to pick this up a little bit later on, in further series, and we can really sort of build out on it. So for now, I'm going to add some parking. I really do need a spot for some fire coverage on here. I want the helicopters more than anything else. We've got kind of patchy coverage in the city, and I would like at some point to come back and revisit this and maybe have some like firefighting boats. This would be a firefighting boat depot potentially down this part of the map, so it could be pretty nice. We don't have assets or the buildings, or we don't have any facility for it whatsoever, but that's in my mind, that's where it's going to be later on. So I reckon at this point it's time to get a little bit of detail in. There's a few bits and pieces I want to add, a few bits and pieces I want to tidy up, and then we can really crack on with the next part of the build. Alright folks, so that's us pretty much done and dusted for this part of the build. I think I'm reasonably happy with it. We've done a little bit of detailing on the ground and nothing too major. I think we've got a couple of decent open spaces that we can kind of work on a bit later on as well. But the main aim for this build really was to try and sort of compactly bring all of these transport services together, and obviously we've managed to do that. I think using Tygon's rail network here for the yards looks pretty good. It's kind of a unique build. The tram network, or the tram depot I should say rather, the addition of static ploppables, perfect. And obviously we've got the bus depot and a few other bits and pieces sort of around there. I thought it was a good place to get the park maintenance depot as well. One thing that didn't make the video here, I just cut it out really, it was kind of boring to watch, was I've taken the main sort of canal or sort of fort area and I've brought it into a much smaller scale. So I've used the image overlay mod and I've just recreated another one around here. Now, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time going over this. I'm happy with the shape, but I'm not necessarily happy with the actual sort of canals or the quay walls. So I'm going to keep working on that and try and figure out what's going to be the best option. Right, so then let's talk about the road networks. As we've hit the border of the island with the rail yard, I am going to allow myself to start building off the island itself and expand outwards. The series of islands that surround the main build island aren't really going to see much development. The real life examples we see in the Netherlands tend to be just mostly grass or some trees and shrubbery and whatnot, and I think that's probably the route that I'm going to go down for in Vorden. That said, I do believe it might give me an opportunity to slot in some very low density buildings and land uses, and it could be a nice opportunity for maybe some churches or cemeteries or other signature type buildings. I'd be interested in your ideas, so if you do have any that you think are going to fit that sort of vibe, then just leave them in the comments. So here's the inspiration for the next part of the build, and this is pretty much a recreation. First we had a little trumpet, it then leads on to a complicated looking parklow with the overpass and some complicated looking road networks underneath. We've got a braided section here with multiple lanes, which will take a little bit of time to do. It leads directly onto a huge stack interchange, which is looking pretty sweet. And then finally we've got another little parklow, but if you note, we've got some overpasses there with some trams and some bike networks as well. This is the build area for this particular stretch of road, so we're going to be removing the trumpet that's here, we're going to be removing the existing network, but we're going to be keeping that rail line that runs, and we're going to be basically just leaving that completely alone. I reckon we've got some scope for an additional train station down here potentially, but again, one for another day. Right now, we're just going to get the roads in. So I reckon this is probably the first time that I've recreated an entire stretch of road network. We've done plenty of interchanges on the channel before, but I think, yeah, this is the first time we've tried to string multiple of them together, and it'd be interesting to see how it works. I think the main highway part of it should work pretty good, but I do have some reservations in terms of just exactly how the traffic will cope with some of the networks that we're going to be building underneath the highway. But on the other hand, we have quite a bit of infrastructure and quite a few exits off the highway within quite a short distance, so potentially just the sheer amount of options that the traffic have might work okay. It'll definitely be interesting to see. The highway part of this video took about 6 hours to do. I'm going to condense it into about 10 minutes and I'm going to be kind of talking you through some of this stuff as and when I do it. So I decided to start with the big stack interchange. One, just its sheer size. We have some really long ramps that I'm going to come back to and work on once we've done the one beside it, but I really needed to make sure that we have the space for that. The other consideration was some of the water networks that we have on the map as well. I did originally think doing it on the other side of the map, but there was quite a big waterway and I would either have to have either tunneled under it or have a really tall bridge, and I didn't want either of them. It was just going to look too janky, it's too much of a variance in terms of elevations, and it was just not going to fit and look decent. So I went over for this side, and I think that's probably the right call. I'm going to create a single node here using the roundabout trick, so you just draw a simple junction, put a roundabout in, and then take your networks in one at a time, joining the roundabout. Once they're all connected together, you just delete the roundabout. I've been doing this for a long time, and it's usually to create, oversized or just larger intersections, but the main reason for doing it here is just to have a single node that we can bring our road networks into, and it will act as a single junction rather than sending traffic separately from one side of the road to the other. Having a look at all these Dutch intersections, do you love having extra lanes coming into the intersections? The intersections tend to be quite big, but I do say it does look pretty good actually once they're actually built. But it doesn't really work unless you have that single point of entry, that single node, so it's definitely worthwhile doing that. Now this section of road is just outside of The Hague in the Netherlands. This has been suggested a couple of times and I can't remember for the life of me who it was that done it, so make yourself known in the comments. I've been sitting on this one for quite some time and it's just too much to have in a single episode, you know, like a standalone, and realistically I thought it's not going to make sense unless we have it in a wider city setting. Now obviously, starting a Dutch theme build, then I had to do it. It was just mandatory. I was slightly worried about the braided sections, you know, the weaving and the overpasses and all that kind of stuff, but in actuality it was pretty straightforward, to be honest. It wasn't too much of a challenge, and it wasn't that time consuming either. Just wanted to make sure that the curves were good, they weren't too wide, and that we have some nice elevations, and obviously we have some proper clearance between the lower and the higher sections. What was quite time consuming actually was this section underneath the highway. The road network's quite a complicated little one. You have different networks as well, and certain turning lanes required quite a bit of concentration and a little bit of patience just to make sure that they're in correctly. But again, if they don't go in first time, just delete them, redo them, and carry on until you're happy with it. The section with the tram, I am looking forward to getting that hooked up as we build out the city. I think that running through the intersection, and especially the little elevated part that we're going to see in a minute, should look really nice. And then obviously it runs directly through the intersection there that we've just built. So yeah, looking forward to seeing that one in full flow. Of course, in the main build in the city centre, we have quite a lot of bike lanes. Call them bike lanes, they're really just red decals and red surfaces on the normal roads. We don't have bike lanes yet. They are coming, of course. Dev Diary was out a little while back, and I'm looking forward to getting hold of them. And I've committed to detailing and all the rest of it in the city centre. I can see that there's probably going to be a fair bit of a rework that's going to have to be done if I want to fit the bike lanes in and have the colouring on the roads correct. The way I have the colours set up on these city centre roads at the moment is that I'm essentially just taking up one full traffic lane and calling it a bike lane. Okay, so we still have the normal car traffic on it. I've got a fairly good idea of how I want the networks to look, and I'm not sure if it's going to be possible once the actual stuff releases. Hopefully we can use Road Builder, but again, the issue we have with Road Builder is when I started messing about with things, it started deleting some of the tram networks, and it is potentially going to be an entire rework of really all the main arterials and potentially some of the side roads as well. And the problem, of course, is all the props, bollards, trees, decals, all that kind of stuff that we've put on the road might potentially have to be redone. But if we have to do it, we have to do it. I am going to put some path networks down here and connect them all onto each of the interchanges. I want to have a full network here, which is pretty nice. I'm really looking forward to getting that built out as well. But the commitment and the amount of time that it's taken to put down the bike networks in this particular build isn't really that much. It's just a few paths, and to make it look nice, we've got the red surfaces and we've got the red net lines. So from what I can tell in the dev diary, it mentioned that it works like paths, so I'm hoping I can just swap them out by using the replace tool. But if we have to just delete them, it's not really the end of the world. It's not that big of a deal. Compared to what I probably have to do within the city centre, it's almost irrelevant. But I think it did make sense as we're building out the interchanges here and we're building out the networks. It kind of makes sense to, at the very minimum, at least reserve that land, and retrofitting it, as I say, shouldn't be too much of an issue. So it's time to get stuck into the third interchange. This one's going to be a park load. We're going to use the same trick that we did earlier on, just by creating the roundabout, and then we'll pull the networks in. Again, that will give us our nice single node. To bring the ramps up, I'm going to use the slope tool, and I'm initially going to just hook them up. I wasn't really too happy with the initial curvature that we have on the loop part of it. It didn't look quite right, it looked a little bit squished, so what you'll see me doing a little bit later on is actually bringing the connection a little bit further down the main road, and we'll get a much improved loop using some of the continuous curve tools to get the nice semicircle. Again, we'll add plenty of additional lanes as we come and join the intersection, and where it makes sense we're going to use the downgrade tool and just knock a lane down, and at least we get some partial lane maths on the go as well. Doesn't need to be perfect, it's not perfect in real life, and of course you can pick and choose to do whatever you want, configure it any way you like. But I'm going to use all of the curve tools that we have at our disposal. One thing I need to do is set up my extra keybinds. I use the extra keybinds mod, it's absolutely superb. I lost them after the last update. They should actually be saved as a profile under the simple mod checker mod. That saves game settings and keybind settings, so I should really get my finger out and get that sorted. It could have come in handy when I was doing this. So here we're going to see, just by redoing that curve, it's certainly a lot better, isn't it? To be honest with you, it looks much like a semicircle, and there's a bit of much better uniformity around the curves. And just getting the extra lane done, we can take a little look just to see exactly how these three sort of link together. So one big system interchange and then two service interchanges either side. And you can have a look, you can see the pink of the bus lane, or the bike lane rather, and exactly how that's going to go. And again, just in a few minutes we're going to hook all of those up together. But of course, before we hook them up, we actually have to create them in the rest of the interchanges. The other thing I'm going to be doing is extending that tram network. We have obviously the first interchange that we did, we've got the tram integrated with the little overpass and underpass. Here I'm just going to do a simple bridge going over, and this kind of mirrors what we have in the real life one as well. But I want to try and get some nice realistic sort of curvatures on here and nice realistic heights. It does have a parallel network. This is going to be the future bike lane. Obviously it's a normal pedestrian path at the moment. As I said, I'm kind of hoping we can just upgrade this, but if not, if we need to redo it, it's not really the end of the world. I'm going to use Move It a fair bit here. I couldn't quite get the heights in just right, and I do prefer to not use Move It unless I absolutely have to when we're building these roads. You can get a fair bit of jank and it just doesn't look quite right, and especially with the changes in elevations and the height. But if we have to use it, we have to use it, and sometimes it's just easier just deleting stuff and redrawing it, quite frankly, and that's usually the way forward. When the opportunity arises, you want to use the curves and do some really big curves, and the bigger the curve, the smoother it generally tends to look. I think that's looking like a pretty good starting point right now. Now, generally speaking, if we can get away with not using elevated sections, don't use them. If you can easily bring it up to the ground, then I certainly suggest doing that. It will obviously be an awful lot cheaper in terms of real life construction, and it does look a little bit better actually once you've got it in game as well. I've went ahead and I've just put the surface work in for the paths. You'll notice that the bridge is not done. I'm just going to show you how to do this. I know I've covered it in the past before, but it's worth just mentioning again. So all you need to do is have your elevated section, draw a net lane of your choice, use the manipulation mode and move it, and just get that into shape. And then what we want to do is we want to use page up and page down, and we want to just try and find exactly where the height is. You can use the object snapping tool, or you can move the nodes up individually. It's entirely up to yourself. I'm going to use the snapping tool, quickly adjust it, and here you see we've got a pretty nice looking elevated section. So you're going to see a couple of different bridging sections throughout, a couple of the different interchanges, and here's the kind of result once you've got the whole thing done. I'm going to go ahead and connect the interchanges together with the path network, and then what we'll do is we'll have a look at how this kind of scales compared to normal sized interchanges, you know, the in-game ones. And I've got a nice little tip, a nice little mod to help you essentially fill the gap in some of your bridge sections, so make sure you stick around for that. To prevent the surface from bleeding onto the networks above, I'm just going to use a net lane underneath the bridging section, and then we'll just carry on with the surfaces that we normally do. So obviously we've got everything hooked up now. It's not necessarily going to be its final form. We've got plenty of development and plenty of scope to build this out and detail it a little bit more. As I said at the beginning of the video, we're ditching the detailing, we're just getting the infrastructure put in, and I think we're at a pretty good starting point where I know that we can build out over here without having to worry too much and spend too much brain space on it. So if you're wondering how this compares to the vanilla stuff, here's the big sort of stack interchange that comes with the base game. Not huge difference, I guess. The ramps are a little bit longer, obviously that's maybe to be expected. I think the southern section there is probably a little bit wider than I would have liked. The ones that are running sort of east to west, obviously they have to be a little bit wider to accommodate the extra lanes, but the ones running north to south, I think we could certainly have scope to sort of just narrow them a little bit. I'm revisiting that first interchange, and I really wanted to fill the gap and plug the gap between the bridging sections. I'm going to use Crypto Gamer slabs. These will work really nicely. Again, we just shift them into place with Move It. Where it doesn't quite fit the gap, I have the option to either mess about with the terraforming a little bit, or we can just surface it up. It's going to be the grass showing, so it's pretty easy to hide it. One thing that's looking a little bit tight, obviously, for our vehicles to get through, so it's easy enough done. We just select the road above it, or road below it rather, and we just shift it down a little bit with Move It, or we can just leave it. It's entirely up to you. But it's a nice little effect, and it gives us something that's a wee bit different in the game. Now, again, I'm not going to be detailing the actual roads or anything like that. Again, that will be something we can maybe revisit once we start development down here, but I reckon as a starting point, we are looking pretty good. So let's check out the final result and see how we've done. I think that interchange is looking pretty nice. I think we've got pretty decent curvature, the ramps are looking decent, and of course we've got that path network which hopefully we can convert to a bike network without too much hassle. But more than anything else, I'm really looking forward to getting out here and getting building. We've got plenty of work still to be done on the main island, but I think that when I want to change of pace, we can expand outwards, and now we've got the infrastructure in place to do that. Being able to have the infrastructure ready and easily connected to the road network that we're going to be building out, later on, is a real boost. It takes away that sort of cognitive load where I have to think about exactly how I'm going to plan things and how I'm going to sort of connect it all to the actual city itself. It's going to give me that opportunity to come back and do a bit of detailing if I want, or we can do a bit of expansion. We can potentially get some industry out here. There'll be office, maybe a football stadium potentially out here. That's been asked for plenty. But really the main point is I can build whatever the heck I want out here, and I don't have to think about it too hard. I can just start building. And that applies on the yard as well. Being able to bring it onto the main island fills a nice gap, but also it gives us a distinct area where it's going to make sense to actually insert a little bit of industry on the actual main island. And it can be a bit jarring if you go from residential to industry directly, so having those sort of bigger buildings that sort of anchor the development makes sense, and it certainly makes things an awful lot easier. If you've liked what you've seen so far, remember this is episode 5, go check out the previous episodes if you've not seen them already, and of course lots of interchange work in today's video. If you want to see more recreations of real life interchanges, check out this video where I make the insane Piccana interchange in Malaysia.